ready to make our pickles. We have to start with cucumbers, and I picked these from my garden. They're Japanese cucumbers. They tend to be thinner, have fewer seeds, taste a lot sweeter. They're very, very good. And I have jalapenos, again, picked those from the garden this morning, about ½ pound. We needed 4 pounds of cucumbers, 2 pounds of onions. These are sweet, Texas kind of sweet onions that I love. We need our spices, using red chili flakes, turmeric, ground ginger, some celery seed, and some yellow mustard seed and peppercorns. Canning salt. Canning and pickling salt is important because it doesn't cloud. If you use regular salt and it has anti-caking agents, sometimes it will make your liquid very cloudy and unappealing. And then we have 2 kinds of vinegar. We're going to be using apple cider vinegar and just regular white vinegar. Some cane sugar, and of course I have some labels that I ordered from myownlabels.com that say Chef Julia's Pickles from last year, and I have my recipe, which I will post in the show notes. And then for jars, I have these pint canning jars with lids. However, I've sterilized the jars, and I've also sterilized the lids by boiling them in water, and they're ready to go. I have my canning pot, and it has plenty of water in there. I'm just kind of letting it heat up because it takes a long time to boil this much water. It has a rack in it. And then I have all my little supplies here. I have a jar lifter, some tongs, a little magnetic holder, a couple of mandolins to slice everything up, and I'm ready to go. My canning jars are in the dishwasher on the high heat setting, and I'm not going to take them out until right before I get ready to fill them to keep them away from any germs. So a lot about canning is food safety and following some pretty standard guidelines, and that's what we're going to do here today. Next, we're going to cut up our cucumbers, onions, and jalapenos and get ready to cover them with some salt and let them sit around for a while and develop some flavor. Be back in a second. So making pickles is really not that hard, but it does involve some time, investment, and several steps, and you really can't rush it. You kind of have to have a day for pickle making because you have to clean all your jars, you have to prepare the vegetables that you're going to be using, you have to process everything after you let it sit for a while. So there are several steps, and we're going to start with the first obvious step, which is to prepare the cucumbers, the onions, and the jalapeno peppers. We're having a sweet and spicy type of pickle. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare these cucumbers, and I'm going to show you how I'm doing it. I'm just going to be taking a mandolin, and I have the mandolin set to make kind of thick slices because I really like the pickles to be a little thicker. This is not where I want thin pickles. And I have a cut resistant glove. If you don't have a, one of those like protective guards, then at least use a cut resistant glove so that you don't risk cutting your fingers. So I have a very sharp mandolin, and I'm just going to take my cucumbers and just run them down this mandolin blade. So they're about, I'd say this is about 1/4 of an inch thick. And this is going to take quite a while because I'm going to go through 4 pounds of cucumbers, and I'm just using a smooth motion to do this. When I get down to the end, I'm going to be very careful because that's close to my fingers, and I'm probably going to leave a little bit at the end so that I don't get super close. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the onions. But the onions, I'm going to use a different mandolin because I have this one set to be very thin. And on the onions, and I'm not going to do all of this on camera, I'm going to do it and come back later when they're all ready to start using for the next step. But for the onions, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to slice them on the mandolin. And this is pretty thin because I don't want the onions to be thick. So these onion slices are pretty thin. That's just how I want them. In fact, they're a little too thin. So I'm going to make the blade a little bit wider until I have it the way I want it. Yeah, that's better. Because if they're too thin, they'll just melt away and you won't even see them. And we want to see our onions in this dish. So these are my pile of onions. And I can do the exact same thing with the jalapenos. I can use the mandolin to cut all the slices of the jalapeno peppers so they're consistent. And sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the pepper. Sometimes they will start to kind of fall apart. So that time, you know, it was a little rough on the pepper. So it might be easier in that case to just cut them. And we're not going to remove the seeds or anything. We're just going to cut slices of pepper. So just however you want to do it. I think peppers probably work better with a knife than with a mandolin. Although probably this mandolin is a little bit sharper. So I bet if I tried to use it for the, yeah, that works a lot better. This is a much sharper mandolin. So I'll come back and use it later for the jalapeno peppers. But for now, I'm gonna go back and start with the cucumbers, get all the cucumbers ready to go. And then what I'm gonna do is layer the cucumbers in this bowl with onions, just kind of set them in this bowl and put some salt on there. I have 1/3 of a cup of canning and pickling salt that I will just be sprinkling on top of the cucumbers and onions. And after I've done that, they're gonna sit in the refrigerator for 1.5 hours with some ice cubes on top to keep them very cold. So the next step will be processing the pickles or the cucumbers in some water, kind of cooking them a little bit, but not too much. So for now, I'm gonna finish this task up, get all the cucumbers and onions sliced and put in this bowl, very simple. And we save the jalapenos for later. They're not gonna go in with the cucumbers and the onions. They go in much later because we don't need them to sit in salt. So I'm gonna get back here with you in just a few minutes after I've had time to do this, and we'll go from there. Thank you. All right, I have all the cucumbers sliced and they're in this huge bowl here. And what I've done is I've layered the pickles and the cucumbers so they're not all, you know, separated. So I've kind of mixed them up a little bit. And then I've taken my 1/3 cup of salt. Remember the canning and pickling salt? And the reason we're using that is because regular salt can create cloudy liquid for your vegetables. And I've just kind of sprinkled the salt on. But as I've done it, I've moved these pickles and onions around. So I'm getting salt on the bottom and the top, not just pouring it on the top and then hoping it comes through to the bottom. No, you really have to get in there and move them around a little bit. So I've got all the salt on there, my 1/3 cup of salt. Got it all layered in here with pickles and onions. You can kind of see that. It's a huge bowl. And then what I'm gonna do next is I'm just gonna cover the top with a layer of ice cubes, just like this. I'm gonna set this in the refrigerator for 1.5 hours. And the next step after that will be to remove the ice cubes, kind of squeeze out any excess liquid, and then we're going to put them in some boiling water, briefly. And then we'll go on to the next step. So to the refrigerator, see you back here soon. Okay, I'm back. And it's been 1.5 hours, and the cucumbers and onions that were in this big bowl are now in a much smaller colander, still draining a little water. And what I did was I rinsed them off 2 or 3 times, probably 3 times in this big bowl. I just filled it with water and put them through the colander, got fresh water, put them in the fresh water, put them through the colander about 3 times to get all that salt off. Not all of it, but you know, the extra salt, we don't need it on there. So I'm gonna set these behind me. And now we're gonna make, I guess you could call it our brine. We've got to put our vinegar, sugar, and our seasonings in this pot and bring it to a boil. And then we're gonna add our cucumbers. So I need, let's see, 1.5 cups of white vinegar. So this is just your typical good old-fashioned white vinegar. I'm gonna put 1.5 cups in here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it on to get a head start because we don't want to waste a lot of time. We want to get this up to a boil so we can get our cucumbers in there. And then we're going to add 1.5 cups of the apple cider vinegar. And I like this Bragg's apple cider vinegar with the mother. That's what it's called. It says apple cider vinegar with the mother. It tastes really good. You really be surprised at the difference the taste is, because one time I had my husband go get some for me, and they didn't have that brand. They had some store brand, and he said, I hope this is fine, but it wasn't as good. It made a difference. 2 cups of sugar. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, oh no, I don't eat sugar. And I don't eat a lot of sugar either, but this is my recipe for sweet and spicy 2 cups. Sweet and spicy pickles. And it's supposed to be sweet. So what I figured was my 2 cups of sugar divided among all these jars. So divided among all these jars, my 2 cups of sugar is 1/4 cup in each jar. And 1/4 cup in each jar, when you start thinking about if you only eat 3 or 4 pickles at a time, it's not a lot of sugar. And I do eat maple syrup, dates. I eat things that have sugar, maybe natural sugars, but they have sugar. So I can't say that I never let anything with sugar pass through my lips. So I'm okay with this sugar. It's just my family recipe, and I like it, so I'm gonna keep it that way. People always ask me, can you leave the sugar out? I'm like, well, I'm 2 tablespoons of mustard seed, yellow mustard seed, not black or not brown. People ask me sometimes if you could leave out things and do other things and make it sugar-free and whatever, and you probably can, but it's not my recipe then. Then it's more like dill pickles, and I don't like dill pickles. 2 teaspoons of turmeric. If I like dill pickles, that's what I would make, but I like sweet pickles. 2 teaspoons of celery seed. And I'm looking at my recipe to make sure I don't put the wrong thing in. 2 teaspoons of celery seed. Okay, so I've got sugar, mustard seed, turmeric, celery seed, 1 teaspoon of ground ginger. And then 1 teaspoon of red chili flakes, 1 teaspoon of peppercorns. These are just black peppercorns. 1 teaspoon. All these things give this really wonderful flavor. And a teaspoon of red chili flakes. I love the red chili flakes. I'm even tempted to put more in, but I won't, because not everybody likes things as spicy as I do. I like them really spicy. So we bring this to a boil. Oh, and I want to show you, I've got my jalapenos. I hand sliced them because the mandolin just kind of was not the right fit for what I was doing. So I just went ahead and sliced them by hand. Now I'm going to whisk together my vinegar, sugar, and spices. And at the same time, while I'm doing this, I have other things ready to go. So for example, let me turn the camera over this way. I have my big pot, my canning pot, and the water is at a boil. And I need to get the, well, I'll just wait until I get closer to it. I've got that. It's kind of simmering, so it's ready. And then I have my boiled lids. So I've got the jar tops and the lids. I think this part is called the, I can't remember the technical names, but these are the tops that sit on top, and then the other part is the lid. Oops, oh my gosh. I just dropped one of the lids. That is too funny. Well, I'm not gonna use that one. See the things that happen when you're messing around? So, I'm gonna let this come to a boil, and it's almost at a boil. So while it's coming to a boil, we'll talk a little bit about the rest of the process. So get all your ingredients together when you're doing this. So you have your giant canning pot. I bought that at Walmart back last year, which last year during the pandemic, during the summer, when everybody was staying at home, you could not find canning supplies. And I think it's kind of like that this year, because my husband had trouble finding jars for me. So good luck, but that was the kind I wanted. It's really huge, and it has a rack, built-in rack. I don't know how many gallons this is, but I think it was something like a 20, maybe it's a 20-gallon pot. And then I have pint jars. Pint is 2 cups. So these are pint jars, and the recipe should make 7. It may not make that many, but we'll see. But I have 8 here just in case. It's better to have an extra one. And what I did with these is I put them in my dishwasher on high heat and an hour cycle, so that I had them sterilized, so to speak, in the dishwasher. You don't have to boil the jars in a big pot of water like Grandma did. I think that was kind of the way people would do it in the past. That's how I did it when I started out. But we don't have to do that as long as we put them in the dishwasher on high heat. Leave them alone. I didn't touch them with my hands. I got them out from the bottom up, set them on my tray. And the reason I have a tray like this, I have a tray lined with a cotton cloth, because once we get the jars out of the canner, we're going to set them on the cloth on this tray. We're not going to set them directly on a granite countertop, because setting them directly on a cold surface like a granite countertop could cause them to crack. So we always want to have a surface to set the jars on. I'll probably fill them on another tray, because I'll get messy and that would get that cloth all kind of messy, so I don't want to do that. But our next step right now, this water's coming to a boil, is to take our cucumbers and onions, and we're going to put them in this solution, this pickles vinegar solution, but only until it comes right back to a boil. So I don't want to boil, the water's almost about to boil. My goal is not to boil the cucumbers and have them cooking in this liquid, because I want them to be really crispy. So the way to do that is I'm just going to get them in this boiling hot vinegar and let it come back to a boil, just a boil, and then I'm going to cut it off and immediately fill those jars. So as soon as I get them in here, I'm going to pause for a minute, come back when it comes back to a boil, and we're going to start filling the jars, and we're going to fill up our canner, and we're going to get the rest of this finished. So let's see. I want it to be at a rolling boil, and it's almost there. All right. It is boiling, so I'm going to dump these in. To kind of help them along so it doesn't splash on me. So all those cucumbers, 4 pounds of cucumbers, ended up filling this one not so gigantic colander, along with the 2 pounds of onions. So it's kind of surprising when you think of how big of a pile of cucumbers we had. I dropped some on the counter there, but that's okay. Put that out. All right, and I want to immerse this into the liquid so that it all gets covered. And then remember, I just want to bring it right back to a boil. So not too long, and then after it's done, then we add the jalapenos. We don't cook the jalapenos in here. They don't need to be in here. They just need to be added after this is done. Okay, so I got it immersed in all this vinegar, sugar, spices. It smells good, it looks good. There's lots of onions. I like the onions too. And our goal right now is to just let it sit here and bring it back to a boil. And that will not take very long. I'm going to turn it on the highest heat. As soon as it comes back to a boil, we'll move on to the last step, which is to fill the jars and get them in the canner. And then we'll have pickles. All right, we're in business. It came back up to a boil. Remember, I had the vinegar solution. I brought it to a boil. I added all the cucumbers and onions. Came right back to a boil, and now I'm adding all those jalapenos. It was ½ pound of jalapenos. And now I'm going to mix it up really well. So what's happened is it's kind of reduced down even more. You can kind of see the color, but you'll see it more when I put it in the jars. But it kind of shrunk the cucumbers a bit because, of course, they got cooked somewhat from being in the hot liquid. But they're not really hard, I mean, not soft. They still have a crunch. So what we can do, what I like, is for them to still have a crunch to them. So if I bite into one, I don't want it to be soft. I want it to have that little crunch, and it does. It's delicious. So now what we're gonna do is I have a clean cloth. It's kind of damp because I don't want to get everything dirty. And I'm gonna start loading up the jars with pickles and onions and jalapeno peppers. But and my hands are really clean, I just washed them. And I'm doing this on a tray because it's messy. So I certainly don't want to do it, you know, just on my countertop because I know it's going to be messy. And the other thing is we're going to leave 1/4 of an inch of headspace. We're going to try not to get these jars too messy. And the proper name for the tops, these things, the flat tops, they are the lids, and the round part that goes around the jar is the band. So I was kind of giving you the wrong names. Okay, so I'm filling these, leaving 1/4 of an inch. We're going to put liquid in here later too. So right now, here's the process. We're filling each jar with cucumbers, plenty of onions, maybe more onions than you like. So if that's too many onions when you make it, don't put so many onions in yours. But I think the onions are good. To me, they're a part of the pickle, is to have a nice balance of pickles and onions. But if you're a person that doesn't love pickled onions, then make yours mostly cucumbers. It doesn't matter. This started out as a recipe from the Ball canning book. This one, this old, I don't think you can even get these anymore. I bet it's one of those things, if you tried to get it on Amazon, it would cost a lot of money because that was like from years and years ago. And I noticed that anything retro from a long time ago now has gone up in value, because I tried to get one for my daughter not too long ago and they didn't have any. But then of course, you know, like everything else, if it's rare, somebody's always trying to sell it. So somebody was selling a used version for a ton of money. So it was kind of like, no, don't want it that bad. So I got them the newer version of the Ball canning jar. So there's a newer one and it's fine. You don't have to get the old classic one. You can get the older one or the newer one, whatever works. So this pretty much filled my 7 jars. It's supposed to make 7, but I think I have enough for an 8th jar. So even though the recipe said that it makes 7 pints, which is exactly what it said, not making that up, and I'm packing it in some, not too much, because remember, stuff expands, so you don't want to press it in there. But I am going to leave 1/4 of an inch of space at the top. So I think I have room to make one more. I have enough to make one more. It's a very tricky process between what is too much and what is not enough. And for this very reason, I sterilized actually 9 jars. I didn't bring the other one in here because this has happened before, where, you know, it says it makes a certain amount, but it made more. So I thought, well, I don't want to be short a canning jar. So I made an extra one, and we're going to fill it up. If you have any left over after this, then you can just have that for your snack. This will last a couple of weeks, not canned. So, you know, you can just use it for snacks. Why do you can stuff? Well, canned things last a year or so, maybe more, but they're supposed to be eaten within a year. So, the reason that you can it is that you have it around longer. Refrigerator pickles are good, but, you know, after a couple of weeks, they're not good. A lot of people make them just for the day, just for a special recipe, they'll make it. And see, what I'm doing right now is I'm kind of topping off the jars to make sure there's enough in each one, because they kind of settled. So, you know, don't be in a hurry when you're doing this. This is one of those things that take your time and do it right, because if you overfill, don't fill enough, everything has to be balanced. Okay, so I got the right amount, trying to keep the jars clean. And now I'm going to put some of the liquid in the jars. And that's going to be a little tricky, but I'm going to try to do it just from the pot. It should work. Because we want liquid in there too. We can't just have pickles and nothing else in there. Man, that's a little messy. But I'm doing it. It's working. Don't be as messy as me. I probably should have put it in a pitcher. But that takes another piece of equipment, so I'm not going to do that. Let's see, I did that one. Let's do this one. And you want to make sure you save enough so that each jar gets, oops, that slipped. You want to make sure each jar gets a little bit of the juice. And this should be enough for all of them to have plenty. And it is. Try not to spill it on the floor. And I don't really like it at the end when all the mustard seeds are left and that's all that's left. That is not my favorite thing. I'm gonna get my vinegar measuring cup because it's getting a little messy now. And I don't want to spill this all over the place, so I'm going to put it in my measuring cup. That will make it a little bit neater. All right, so there we go. Still pretty messy. Goodness gracious. Well, I'm not going to get any points for neatness today. I'm trying to keep my hand out of the way, but I think I've got enough liquid in all the jars. And we're going to wipe the edges off. See, and then what I have left, I have some snacks. All right, so I spilled some on the floor, and it's right where I'm supposed to be stepping, so I can't step in the pickle juice. All right, so I've got my jars of pickles here, and right now I'm going to wipe the tops off. Oh, and the other thing you're supposed to do is you're supposed to check your jars for cracks before you use them, because you can reuse the jars. So these are actually new jars. I didn't reuse these jars. Some more towels. But I do have a lot of jars that I could have used, but I was running out because I had used them for so many other things, because you know, mason jars are really handy for lots of cooking. So I had used all my mason jars and I really needed some new ones. So these are all brand new. But if you're using used ones, what you're supposed to do is examine them for cracks and chips, because you don't want to put that through the canning process. And why? Because under that high heat, it's not pressure, it's just high heat in the water, then you know those jars might crack. So we don't want that to happen. Okay, so now comes the part where we put the lids on. Remember, it's the, where did I put them? Oh, here they are. So we have the lids and the bands. So how do we pick them up? Because remember, they're all clean and we don't want to get our grubby hands on them. We have these little magnetic things you can buy, and that is intended to pick up the lids so that you can put them right on here. Of course, when they're stuck together, you still have to touch the edge, but minimal amount of touching. And remember, these are clean, they've been boiled, so I don't want to get them around anything that's not clean, because remember, we're trying to keep everything from being dirty, and we don't want anything to touch the top of the lids. If the pickle jar seems too full, like it's going to touch the lid, then take out some of your pickles, because if it touches the lid, then I can't remember what the problem is. It may not seal properly, I think is the issue, that if it won't seal properly, if your product is too close to the lid, if it's touching. And the other thing that we want to not do is we don't want to disturb the jar and move it around, because we don't want the liquid to touch the top of the lid, because that will keep it from sealing. So now what I'm doing is I'm putting the bands on, but I'm only screwing them. It's called finger tight. So I'm not, using arm muscles to screw them on because we don't want them to be on there so tight during the canning process. Now later on we can tighten them up, but right now we just want them finger tight, meaning not very tight. And then our next step, and I'm going to move the camera over so you can see better. Once all the bands are on, so the lid is the flat one, the band is the round one. We wipe the edges off really well. I'm going to shift the camera over here toward the water. This pot of water is really hot. So I'm going to take the lid off very carefully, and I'm going to turn the heat back up because I had kind of turned it down. I've got the rack here. So my pot has a rack that looks like this. It fits on the top, and then you can lower it into the pan. You can lower all the jars. So what we're going to do, we're not going to handle the jars with our hand because that could end up getting kind of hot. So we're just going to set them on here. Well, this part isn't hot, so I think we'll be all right. And I'm going to wipe the jars off as I'm putting them in here if they're a little sticky. So I'm just going to set them here kind of evenly. They should all fit. And then what we have to do is we have to lower this into the water, and it needs to be covered by 1 inch, and we don't want these jars touching one another. We want there to be enough space so they're not touching. So we might only be able to fit, let's see if we can fit all 8 of them in here. We might not be able to get all 8, and we can put one in the middle. Let's see if we can get one more in here. If not, that would be a shame. Yeah, we can get one more in here. Barely. So you see I'm adjusting them all so they're not touching, because the reason you don't want them touching is they're going to start rattling around as they process. They'll move around. So if they start moving around and they're cracking against one another, something will break. We don't want that to happen. So hopefully they're not so close. And so now I'm going to lower it in very carefully and hope that, okay. Now I've got too much water in here, which is what happens sometimes. You get it to where you've got too much water because the water is going to start bubbling over. So what I can do about that, I always have some bowls handy, is I can remove some of the water, because I only need 1 inch to cover the top. I don't need 2 or 3 inches. Usually the problem is the opposite, that you end up with not enough water covering your jars. Okay, so now I've got about 1 inch. And so if what you're supposed to do, and I'm trying to bring it back to a boil, and then once it's at a boil, then I start counting the time. And my time for this recipe is, I'm going to process it for 10 minutes. And this is a boiling water canner. So once it comes back to a boil, I'm going to start my countdown for 10 minutes. But what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to keep some hot boiling water handy, which I have my kettle here. I had it right behind me. So in case I didn't have enough water, because that's the problem that you usually run into, is you don't have enough water, and then you're panicking because there's not 1 inch of water above your jars. You can't add cold water because then it's going to take forever to bring it back to boiling. So you should have boiling water standing by that you can put in here if you're a little short. But in my case, it was the opposite. I had to take some water out. So it's coming to a boil now. I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes. I see all the bubbles, so I know it's coming to the kind of boil I'm talking about. I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes. And then in 10 minutes, the next step is to take the jars out, and we'll discuss that here in a minute. All right, our time is up. 10 minutes passed by very quickly. And the next step is to get them out of the canner. And I've lifted that rack back up. Remember, it started in this position. And I'm going to use this lifter to get them out of here. And I'm not going to disturb them. I see some water at the top, so I'm just going to blot it up with my towel because I don't want to disturb the liquid inside the canning jars right now. I'm going to very carefully lift them out of here without turning them from side to side and leave a couple inches in between each jar as I take it out. And I'm going to kind of try to take them out a little evenly spread out on this canning rack so that it doesn't start going crooked. This one has a little bit of liquid. And I've already heard some of them seal. They make a popping sound when they're sealed. And as they sit here and cool off, you'll hear them make this like pop, pop. It's kind of hard to describe, but you'll recognize it because the ultimate goal is you want the jar lids to seal. And the way you're going to know that they're sealed is you see a little depression in them. You'll see, I can see it on here. I can't really show you right now, but I'll bring the camera over in a minute and show you. But there is a little bit of a depression in the center of the jar, in the center of the lid, that shows that it's sealed. Look at this one. And what happens, we're supposed to leave him here for 12 hours, not disturb him at all for 12 hours. So don't get anxious and say, oh, I want to taste my pickles. Because if you do, then you might end up disturbing the canning process, the sealing process. So you're supposed to leave them alone, don't disturb them. And at the end of that time, how you'll know that they're sealed is the lid will be really tight and there'll be like a depression. And I'm going to go back to my camera and show you. So you'll see what I'm talking about, because a couple of them already have that. You see on the lid where there's a little circle that looks like it's, I don't know if you can really tell, but you'll hear it and you'll be able to tell because when you depress the top of the jar, it won't move. It will be really firm and tight. So basically, when you touch it, it won't sink in. Some of these do not have the seal formed yet because they're still flat and smooth, but this one definitely has already popped. I heard it earlier. But you should be able to touch it and nothing moves. If you can touch it and it moves and it springs back and forth, that means it didn't seal. And sometimes they don't seal because, remember, if you didn't get all the pickle juice off the top, sometimes it won't form a seal on that band. On the lid. So that's why everything has to be clean. And then the other thing is, let's say that you had some of your jars didn't seal, and at the end of your 12 hours or whatever, 2 hours, you check them and nothing's happened. Usually within 2 hours they're sealed. And so you look at it and you've got some that didn't seal. What do? Well, you can go through the whole canning process again. So I never put this stuff away until I know everything's sealed, because I've had that happen. And all you do is you take the lid off, clean the jar off really well, do everything all over again, and redo it. As long as it's within 24 hours, you can re-can it if it's been done once. Hopefully you shouldn't have to do that. It's kind of a pain. And you should be able to just do it one time. Normally that works. Okay, so all we have to do is wait our 12 hours, and then the fun part for me is I had some labels made. They're called Chef Julia's Pickles, sweet and spicy, onions and hot peppers. And I had these made at a company called myownlabels.com. And you can make a small quantity of labels, like for people like me that I don't make a lot of stuff. I make pickles, I make fig jam, but my fig tree died this year. Well, it didn't die. It was affected by the freeze, but it's coming back. But usually I make fig jam and pickles. That's all I ever make. And I make things in the holidays, like banana bread and pumpkin bread. So you can get labels for your special holiday gifts or your pickles or whatever. And so after everything's all nice and cooled off and everything is done, I put the labels on. And then my plan is to give these away as gifts. I'll keep a couple for myself and I'll give them to my friends. And then my cucumbers, in the garden are still producing like crazy. So I may have to do this all over again in a week from now. So every day I go out to the garden, collect a handful of cucumbers, stick them in the refrigerator, and when I get 4 pounds, then I can do this all over again. And I also have plenty of jalapenos in the garden. So if you don't have a garden and you want to make your own pickles, just go to the store and get some pickling cucumbers. They work a lot better than those big traditional cucumbers. Can be kind of bitter, but pickling cucumbers are made for pickling. And Japanese cucumbers are really sweet, so I grow them every year because they taste really good and they have very few seeds. So grow Japanese cucumbers. I get them from Kitasawa Seed Company. I guess I can put the link in the show notes so you'll know and know the name of my type of cucumbers I get. So I hope you make pickles and that this video is helpful to you. And please subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my videos. I usually make whole food, plant-based, no oil, healthy dishes. And I hope you enjoyed this today. So thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.